You got to give them something to hang their hat on.
Yep.
To be able to say, okay, this student really knows what's going on. Without that, I think it's going to be tough.
So question 1, ask the dean, I attended med school in Colombia, did not finish. Do those classes need to be added to my application? Colombia has a different grading scale. I moved to the US and finished my bachelor's. However, my overall and science GPA are low, 2.7. I have over 130 credits. Will a postbac help my GPA? Is it possible to do a master's to improve the GPA? Given that I could apply for financial aid for a master's. So med school in Colombia.
Yes.
How does that affect an application? Someone who starts medical school and stops, whether international or domestic.
Well, it certainly does affect things, particularly if it's a domestic medical school. I think if it's a foreign medical school, then there could be intervening issues that, immigration, or maybe there was family issues, or, there could be a variety of things that would affect why a student didn't finish in this case, Colombia.
Yep.
So the short answer is no, she would not need to include those in the application. Foreign coursework doesn't get included. So none of that's going to be relevant.
Yep. And I'll pause there. So that I think was probably more specific to TMDSAS.
Yes.
AMCAS, I'm pretty sure, requires the question if you've matriculated to any medical school, no matter where, including that. Including that coursework.
And we do, TMDSAS does require that you indicate if you had started a med school. I don't think it specifies that it's a domestic medical school. So you would have to include information about that.
Yeah.
But in terms of entering courses and stuff for the Texas service, no, you would not include those.
Yeah. Okay. So probably not a big deal. So go ahead and continue.
Right. Well, the other part of the application, now she said that she came to the U.S. and finished a bachelor's degree, correct?
Entered the U.S. and I don't know if she's saying she finished the bachelor's degree in the U.S., moved to the U.S. and finished my bachelor's. Okay. And then overall and science GPA are low, 2.7. So obviously needs some remediation there.
Correct. Yeah. So certainly think a postbac would be advisable there.
Yeah, and she's specifically asking about a master's because, like many students, you can get financial aid for a master's, which
right?
You can't get for a bachelor's or a postbac.
This is one of the things where it's balancing out what's going to be optimal for your application with what are the other realities of your life, including financial realities.
Yep.
And so if she needs financial aid, and doing a master's postbac is the only sort of plausibility for that, then I would say go for it. If there's nothing else you can do, then there's nothing else you can do. So
yeah, it's do a master's or do nothing and go have another career. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's one of those hard ones. So obviously a master's, obviously you need to do well. The biggest thing for me is always, right, why did you do so poorly in your undergrad? And obviously coming from Colombia, and whether or not you're from Colombia or you just did your medical school in Colombia, whatever that looks like, why did you do so poorly coming to the U.S.? Was it just a cultural change? Right. Was it just learning a new language? Whatever that may be, and making sure that you're ready as soon as you start your master's or whatever you end up doing, making sure you're ready to hit the ground running and get as close to a 4.0 as possible.
Absolutely. That's, I think there's a whole lot of self-reflection necessary here with understanding, exactly what was going on and why things sort of played out the way they did. You're exactly right. Yeah. So once that occurs, then, I don't think she can just jump right in and without that sort of self-reflection and understanding, what was going on. But once she kind of deals with that, then I think, going into a master's program would be advisable. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Another question here that I will just read. Actually, there we go. Go ahead, Rachel. That's the one I was going to read. Perfect. It says, afternoon, I just received my MCAT score, and it was unexpectedly not the greatest, 495. I applied to both DO and MD early in July and was wondering if I should just wait to submit my scores to ACOMAS now or when I plan to take it first thing in January, since most schools accept January test scores. FYI, just got an interview invite. Congrats.
Yeah.
This is always one of those kind of tricky questions. A lot of people think, and right or wrong, that they can like withhold their MCAT score from schools. Like, oh, that's not the score I want. I'm not going to tell them what it was, and I'll just wait and show them later. I don't think it works that way. Yes, you have to, quote unquote, release your scores, but they're going to see your 495 either way. I don't know, Rachel, if you've dug into the ACOMAS instruction manual at all, but I'm not exactly sure of all of the nuts and bolts to know like when you actually release the score, or is it just when you submit your application, you are quote unquote releasing your scores, and that way any score that comes in gets released automatically, which I think that's how it works. But
yeah, the way you just said it. So I don't have ACOMAS as well committed to memory as AMCAS, which is, an improvement point for me. It's good to have things to strive for. But for AMCAS, they're going to see everything in the history of ever within that new limits. They came out with some new guidelines on like how many you can take and lifetime scores.
Right.
And some of the really, really old ones do, if you were before those limits, do drop off. But anything you've taken in the last few years, they're going to see.
Yeah. So I think I know for TMDSAS that they will not see your scores until you release them. So we don't get anything until you go in once you see the scores and you release them to TMDSAS. My suspicion is that that's the same way it works with ACOMAS.
Yeah.
But because mainly because obviously AMCAS is a connection with they're all the same family and stuff.
Yep.
Whereas ACOMAS and Texas Service are outside of that family. I'm using family very loosely here.
Yeah.
Now, so the student said, should I wait to sit my score? So we kind of rejected the premise of that question. Now, getting at the meta point I think she was making, which is if I'm applying to some schools that will accept a January score, well, you can tell them you're going to take it in January, right? There's that place in the application where you can do that. So if you know the school is going to consider January and you plan to retake, I mean, you did just get an interview, so that's exciting. But so you have that going for you, that if you want to let them know you're trying again. But I mean, it gets a little bit at the thing that Ryan and Scott were just saying to the last person who was asking about GPA. If you're going to retake, then I want you to spend some time reflecting on what happened with the 495. You said unexpectedly not the greatest. So, I mean, I'm sorry that happened, but it also kind of makes me hopeful for you, because if you didn't expect it, then maybe that means you had practice tests that were much better. And then even then, that's where I think you have to have some really tough love with yourself about how you took those practice tests. If you were in your PJs and starting them at noon because you're not a morning person, but then you got a 6 a.m. test time, well, that might explain the difference, right? So thinking really hard about, you can never perfectly recreate testing conditions, but what can you do to get as close to testing conditions? And maybe you're going to go to the test center in your PJs. I mean, I might, but just, like whatever you need to do to be comfortable, right? But you do want to try to recreate that experience, is my point. So before you plan to re-prep and retake, please think about what needs to be different.
Yeah.
Good point.
So did we answer that? So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So yes, potentially, at least according to TMDSAS, and I just did a quick Google search, and it looks like you do manually log in to AAMC, release those scores. I would have hoped it is you release the scores once. It's almost like a HIPAA form that you fill out and be like, you are allowed to talk to this person from this date moving forward, but it looks like potentially you have to go in and release every time.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Which seems silly, but it is what it is. So I don't know. I don't know if it serves you well, speaking to the student again, to withhold a score. Obviously, it's not a good score. But if you're signifying that you're going to retake it, then hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and a lot of schools, once you say I'm going to retake it, they're just going to put the brakes on.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, well, we're going to wait for the new score.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the old score was.
Correct.
This is 505 or 58 or 510.
Yeah.
Then, they're still going to put the brakes on and wait for that new score if you say you're going to take it.
And obviously this year during pandemic times, just everything's up in the air, whether schools are looking at MCAT scores or not looking at MCAT scores. So just keep trucking.
Yep.
As they say. All right. Female, 37-year-old single mom, non-traditional student, GPA 3.43 from a 3.18, getting a second degree in biochemistry, finishing this May. Great job. Science GPA is a 3.68. Great job. Volunteer hours, shadowing hours, clinical hours, ER, and research. Not sure my GPA will hold me back in the application process, so I plan on putting a lot of effort into the MCAT. How can I set up a good timeline for when to study for the MCAT, when to take it, and when to submit my AAMC application? I have a friend that said he didn't realize there was blah, blah, blah. So my assumption is kind of a lag between taking the test and getting a score and a lag between submitting and actually getting verified and all that stuff. So obviously timeline is important, right? And that's what MAPT is for. We're going to have all of that in there. We were actually just talking to the developer last week about different timelines and what we want and what it should look like. And so we're excited to continue working on all these features. So,
to me, one of the things that's relevant here is, I know she says she's finishing in next May. Is her intention to apply next year? If so, then that changes that changes the calculus a little bit, rather than waiting an additional year and applying.
Yep.
So let's assume for a second that she's applying next year. Then I think that, starting the MCAT study process would be good, like right now, like on a limited kind of basis, a few hours a week. But I would say by the winter break, she would need to use that pretty significantly when she's in no classes. She would need to use that pretty significantly for MCAT studying, and then obviously all next spring there would need to be a pretty devoted effort in the spring. Now, if she wanted to take, what she could do is delay taking it until maybe like June or July, and then that would give her time outside of outside of schoolwork to really focus on the MCAT after she had graduated.
Yeah.
So that seems like a reasonable timeline to me. It does delay the getting the score back a little bit.
Yeah.
But so particularly she's a single mom. She's got a lot going on.
Yeah. So
her time is very valuable. So I think, having that time during the winter break to really focus on nothing but MCAT, having the time after she graduates in May to focus on the MCAT for a month or two, and then in the intervening times to focus on it as much as she's able to. That seems like a reasonable timeline to me. But if she doesn't want to delay a year and just spend that whole year, a gap year, doing nothing but MCAT.
Yeah, that's always the tricky thing that students don't realize, just how much is involved with an application, from gathering letters of recs and transcripts and writing personal statements and extracurricular descriptions and secondary essays. And then you throw on being a single mom onto that. You throw on finishing up your second degree, trying to continue that upward trend in your grades, and you throw on top of that studying for this little thing called the MCAT, something typically is bound to break there. So I like what you said, potentially, right? Ideal timeline, historically, we say, take the test March or April so you get your score back. You have some flexibility with if you need to retake.
Right.
But with so many other responsibilities, it may be better to delay it. And even though you are delaying the MCAT, not necessarily delaying the application, but in this potential scenario, delaying when to take the MCAT, you are still setting yourself up for more success because you'll have some more dedicated time to study for the MCAT outside of classes. So you can still work on your applications, finish your classes, submit your applications still early, take the test a little bit later than it has been historically recommended, and you hopefully will do better because of that.
Yeah, agreed.
Interesting. I like that one.
Yeah.
All right. What suggestions do you have for an international student? I live in the U.S. and I am waiting for my green card. It is still in the process, but considering the current situation, I don't know when I will get it yet. I'm planning on taking my MCAT in the spring of 2021 and apply in June. Should I wait for my green card or apply as an international applicant? Tricky.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think waiting for your green card is the best option there. International students, number one, international students get no financial aid, whatsoever, which is huge. International students are, don't really, they're considered non-residents regardless of where you're applying for schools that have residency requirements. Which even some private schools do. So I think that now there's a form, there's a certain status that you get when you've applied for a green card that is prior to getting the green card, that once you get that status, and I can't remember what it's called, then you're considered far enough along in the process that they'll consider this, they'll consider you a non-resident, a resident alien. So, but I can't remember exactly what that status is called. It's once you get a certain form. And so regardless, what I would say for this applicant is I would wait. I'd wait to get your resident status. I think things are going to be so much easier for you, even if it means delaying a year. I think it'd be best. I mean, you could go ahead and apply as an international student, but then the question is, what if you get in, and how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah.
And then you're only relying on private loans, which are very expensive.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of reasons to really consider the green card as a necessary step in this process.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've received this question a lot, and I always say, well, when do you think you can get your green card? If it's going to be 5 years, then maybe go ahead and apply. If it's going to be a year, then it's like, well, what's that timeline look like? Can you potentially apply and bank on getting your green card before you matriculate and start medical school, before you need to handle all the finances and all that?
Right.
It's this weird balance, because as you mentioned, right, private loans and getting a cosigner for those loans and all this stuff, it's such a headache. And I haven't looked at rates or anything in a long time, but usually they're not super competitive, and so things are really hard financially when you do that route as well. And at the end of the day as well, being an international student, you're just a lot less likely to get in, because schools are looking at residents first.
Yep.
So
that's exactly right. Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I think, if, and I know sometimes in terms of getting a green card, you don't actually know what the timeline is going to look like. And so in terms of when you might get that green card. But I would say, I just think it'd be more advantageous for the student to wait to get the green card.
Yeah. I agree. I had a few credits transferred to a U.S. bachelor degree from a foreign school. Do I need to submit my foreign transcript? The MCAT says they don't evaluate foreign degrees. I know this one.
Go for it.
If you had credits from a foreign institution that are transferred, and again, Rachel's the MCAS instruction manual expert, but if you had credits transferred that go towards your degree here in the States, then you need to submit. As far as I know, you need to submit your transcripts, your foreign transcripts.
Mm-hmm.
If you took foreign credits and they don't transfer, you just ignore them, then it's like it never happened. But
yeah.
Yeah, that's also how I understand it. Although, for the question asker, definitely go check out the current AMCAS handbook. It's in Mapped if you go to the Mapped resources, because there's a lot of fine print on it. I don't know if this is your case, but we've had a few students who had international credits from schools that are closed or closed for COVID. So there are some cases where you can request a transcript exception with huge emphasis on request. That's not a guarantee. So if you're having a lot of trouble getting your transcript, there are some choices. So check out the handbook for that.
Yep. Bueno.
Okay, let's see. Here we go.
I have approximately 150 shadowing hours spread over 2017 to 2018. In 2018, I began working full-time, clinical, and continued school full-time. I still work full-time in EMS. Is there a necessity to continue shadowing at this point with the additional thousands of hours of clinical experience? I love this question. It's one of those checklist type questions.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Do I need to check off the box of shadowing hours?
Yeah.
With
or have I checked it off already?
Yeah. And my answer to this question is absolutely not. I mean, you're getting tons of clinical experience. You're essentially, I just don't think there's really a point to shadowing. Shadowing has somewhat limited, value anyway, depending on who you're shadowing. But I think with the load of clinical experience that you're doing, I would say no.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I get this question a lot, and getting all of that clinical experience is definitely awesome. You have a lot of shadowing hours already, although a little bit older. I'm always a fan of consistency and showing some recency. So I always say it doesn't hurt to go try to get like 4 or 5 hours a month, just a half a day every month or so, just to show some continued interest. But it doesn't sound like you need it. But I'm always a fan of getting some more.
Well, and particularly now, since with e-shadowing,
Yep.
you could do it pretty easily from the comfort of your living room
in your PJs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we had 3,200 people qualify for an hour of e-shadowing last week, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that is cool.
We got another one going tonight too.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So Scott says no. I say it doesn't hurt. So all right. What's the cost benefit of having a committee letter versus strong individual letters? Ooh, this is a good question. I don't think it's really come up a bunch, Scott. And I'm going to preface the question. I'll kick it over to you because having been the former director of admissions at obviously UT Southwestern Medical School, you have a lot of experience dealing with committee letters from different pre-health committees. I despise pre-health committee letters. I don't think they're useful. I think they continue to separate students who may have struggled early on and are really fighting their way back up. It makes depending on how the pre-health committee is set up, with who they work with and who they won't work with, it sets up the pre-health committee as the gatekeeper to who they think is going to get into medical school and who they don't think will get in. Depending on how the pre-health committees are funded, a lot of them keep track of their stats and say, look, at 97% of the students we helped got into medical school. And so they are picking and choosing who they're going to help and get in because of that. And so I don't systematically, I don't think they work. I think there's too much bias involved. And so I don't like them. What do you think?
So, let me just say that it depends a lot on how the committee structure is set up at a given school. Some schools don't have any requirements for participating in the committee process. So in that case, then I think that it doesn't have that inherent bias that you're talking about. Now, for schools that do have some sort of bias or some sort of requirements for participating in the process, I think you do have to. I think it does affect things a little bit. Now, I know when I was at UT Dallas, we had a committee process and we did have some requirements. There was not an MCAT requirement, but there was a GPA requirement. But we would always once over the picture of the student academically, and often we would see like good trends or that the last 60 hours were so much better or, stuff like that, which we would then allow the student to go through the process. But for example, if a student was a 2.7 student and consistently a 2.7 student, then yeah, we're not gonna do that. So I think in our case, it was an issue of scale. We didn't have the ability to do everybody when there was particularly some people who their picture just wasn't going to make it. It was just not a good thing. So anyway, so now to the issue of the whether you should go through the process or not as a choice that you would make, I think my experience has been admissions committees do look at that and they wonder, particularly on undergraduate institutions where they know them well, why didn't this student get a committee letter? What happened, or why is this the way it is? Now, does that mean it's just not going to happen for them, or that the medical school will somehow disadvantage them in the admissions process? Then I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think if a student, for whatever reason, chooses to just do their own thing and get individual letters or whatever, then that's your process that you want to go through. But I do think it raises a question. Now, what that question might mean in the process is unclear. It would depend on other things in the application and stuff. But it will raise a question as to, why did this student not have a good relationship with his pre-med office, and had he made enemies, or what's going on here that causes this? And I would say that when I was at UT Southwestern, that there were a few times where I got on the phone with the pre-med advisor and called them up and said, "Why didn't this student get a pre-med letter?"
Yeah,
or a committee letter. And on more than a few occasions, the answer was, "Oh, we've never heard of this."
Yeah. That would my assumption would be that's probably the most common, and then far less common is that person you don't want in your class. They're horrible.
Didn't qualify, or they because we did have a couple of students who, when I was at UT Dallas, who we didn't. It was very clear they were not going to get a good recommendation, and it was because of personal issues, not academic issues. It was because the person was very clearly had some personal traits that were not acceptable, at least to us as a committee. And so we were like, this is, and I would advise the student, I would advise you to go on your own and, just do it on your own with individual letters and stuff, because we're really not going to be able to help you.
Yeah. So that's really the heart of my frustration is you're bringing and kind of the threshold of stats and other stuff is one thing that causes a lot of issues, especially for disadvantaged students. But
Right.
you're bringing personality bias in as well. Like, I just don't like that student, and I think personally that they are not going to be a good doctor. Therefore, the specific language that I'm going to use in my letter that I'm going to write, the medical schools are going to know to stay away from this student. And I don't think that's the role of a pre-health office.
Well, I mean, I think that if you see it as a continuum, as that there's a place for everyone's opinion in the process. These pre-med offices and the faculty in which the student has interacted have dealt with them for 4 years, maybe sometimes longer, sometimes a little bit less.
Yep.
But they've dealt with them for a long time, and I think there is a value, and that's what the value is to an admissions committee, is that we have, in the case of individual letters, we have individual letters from an individual faculty member who knew them for 3 months in one semester.
Yep.
And yet here's the
and it's
the
most likely going to be a positive-ish letter, right?
Right,
Neutral or
'cause it meant
positive.
an A or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that the value to the admissions committee of a committee letter is it's dealing with and I would say that that it's not often, it's fairly rare that an admissions committee is going to say that a committee letter is going to say, we don't like this person for various reasons, whatever. In general, they're going to be very supportive. Now, how effusive they'll be will depend on kind of their experiences with them and stuff like that. But I just don't have the sort of negative feeling that you do with regard to that. They're just like, we're going to, be the gatekeeper and stuff like that. I think most faculty committees at the undergraduate level are really trying to do the right thing and are really trying to help the medical schools out. And it's totally up to the medical school what they want to do with that. And I've seen students who got, didn't go through the committee process, and they get into a lot of schools, and, things go well. And so, so I don't have the same level of concern. I do see where your concern comes from.
Yeah. And my concern isn't just my concern, right? It's being in this world now. And obviously you're in this world too, but hearing students when I go to conferences, getting private messages, getting emails with their stories of why their committee is shutting them out. And it's just ridiculous.
Well, but you have, I get that, but I do agree that you have to take that with a grain of salt, because that is the student's perspective.
Yep.
And the student may think one thing when the reality may be something totally different.
Correct.
I mean, I have a long list of students who walked into my office. We went through a whole thing, and they heard something completely different than what I was trying to communicate. And all of a sudden they're in the dean's office, and they're, raising hell because, and I'm like, that is not at all what I said. Where on earth did that come from? Yeah. So anyway.
I gotcha.
So Rachel? This is kind of a hot topic. I mean, it's good that the student asked, right? Because, I think to answer the question, we said if you can't go through committee, then go personal. But there's some real value in the committee. I don't want to imply that the question asker is at all lacking personal traits that med schools expect, but because of the question, I thought it was a good time to remind you guys that Dr. Wright, is leading a 6-week series, a workshop session about personal traits that med schools expect to see in pre-meds.
Starting on Thursday. Mm-hmm.
So, we can cultivate ourselves, right? Like we are who we are, but we can reflect on the pieces of us that, if that you're not always the most adaptable person, that's a skill you can learn. You can become more adaptable. So we're going to do a deep dive into that for half an hour or 45 minutes once a week for the next 6 weeks. So I just wanted to put that out there while we're in that arena of why would a committee say no to me? Maybe it's something you can fix.
But I have a 4.0 and a 520. What does it matter if I'm an arrogant jerk?
Right.
What does it matter if I've never done anything for anyone ever?
Oops.
Oh, wait, I'm supposed to critically think? I don't just regurgitate information?
Ooh,
Yeah.
ouch.
What?
Ouch. Not speaking
Sorry,
to any
guys.
of you watching
Not any of
this.
you.
Of course, of
Yes.
course.
No one who's listening to this.
Yes.
Definitely.
Is in that case, right?
Yeah.
Okay, friends. I'll stop plugging that event now. I know the banner gets to be a little much after a while. I just wanted to make sure you guys knew. All right, let's move on with the next comment here.
And just a quick plug, since this is going out later, recorded on YouTube. As you watch this, the series is probably out on YouTube already. So go to our
Good point.
channel.
So yeah, if you're watching live, you can catch it Thursday. If you're watching the replay, you can catch it on map.tv.
Yeah.
Which is YouTube.
Which is YouTube. All right.
Okay. Let's see. Here's a question.
What is the percentage of international student admission each year? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Yeah. I'm sure if you look up, just Google AAMC data, they probably have a graph, at least from a AAMC standpoint. And obviously that's one of the things that I don't like about this process, because it's so divided with the MD application, the Texas application, the DO application. All of the data isn't compiled, and I wish
Correct.
the application services would do a better job, since at the end of the day, that would help students just get a better picture, clearer picture of everything going on. But you could most likely Google AAMC data, you could Google ACOMIS data and see what's going on out there.
Right.
And then if you have a subscription to the MSAR, the Medical School Admissions Requirement platform that the AAMC sells, surprisingly, then you can typically see per school information, whether they interview international applicants and how many they accept, et cetera.
Correct.
Just a quick question. Is now a good time to ask professors for letters of recommendations and store them on Interfolio for next cycle? I can't wait until we have letter of recommendation features built into Mapped, so that we can just
that'd be great.
have it all there.
Agreed.
Letters of recommendation. How early is too early? What should students be thinking about?
Yeah, I think it's too early for next cycle. I would wait until at least after the first of the year.
Yeah.
I like it when the letters seem recent. And if they're too old, relatively speaking, then I sort of wonder, well, are you not keeping up with this professor? You're not, you just were in his class and you got an A, and so you asked for a letter immediately, and after that you just like chalked him off to nothing, or what's going on with that? So I would say wait until after the first of the year and then get them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of setting expectations and planting the seed. So setting the expectation with the professor. Say, hey, Dr. Smith, I loved your class, or I loved your class 3 years ago, whenever it was. Just so you know, I'm applying to medical school. I think we talked about it. I'm applying to medical school next year. I think it's a little too soon to ask for a letter of recommendation now, but I would really be grateful if you would write me a letter of recommendation. Is it okay if I hit you up at the beginning of the year and ask for one? Just set that expectation, and then you're also kind of rekindling that relationship if it's been a little bit while. While.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
How will I explain to a committee that the most part of my time is dedicated to my job that is not related at all with science? So they're spending more time outside of science and medicine. It's one of the super common questions that we get a lot is I have a job. It's not really healthcare related, not science related. And therefore, right, the second part of this question, or the kind of implied part of this question, is it limits the amount of stuff that I can do that is clinically related, that is related to medicine.
Right. Well, I think that, admissions committees do recognize that some students have to work and maybe even work full time. And that's a reality That, however, does not replace getting some experiences.
Yep.
You can't just say, oh, I work full time, so I can't do anything, and I still want to go to medical school, but I've never done anything.
Yep.
That's not going to work most of the time. I think you still have to take opportunities to get some experiences and to know that what you're getting into and what the real life of a doctor is, et cetera. So it's not it's not going to disadvantage you completely to say I have a full-time job and I don't have a whole lot of time on my hands to do a lot of shadowing or a lot of clinical activities or stuff. But you do, unless you're working 80 hours a week or more, you've got some pockets of time when you can do something.
Yeah.
That will be helpful in your application, that will help the admissions committee have you got to give them something to hang their hat on.
Yep.
To be able to say, okay, this student really knows what's going on. Without that, I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah, it's an excuse to a certain extent to say why you don't have as many hours as a more traditional student who doesn't have those other responsibilities, but it's not an excuse to completely avoid those experiences.
Right. That's right.
Oh, all right. Good one. I like that one. I'm a military wife. Thank you. Thank you for your service. And have moved a lot. I don't know what state I'll be in the year before I apply. I'd like to be able to make my school list and know prereqs. Any suggestions? With my military background, I get a lot of military spouses who want to go to medical school.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, oh, right. I know that at the drop of a hat, the military could go, surprise, you're moving, even when you expected not to move for a few years. And I've seen it happen enough that students, usually the military spouse, usually the female in this situation, just is like, I'm not going to apply. I just can't. There's too much uncertainty to really to put my hat in the ring, to be separated from my spouse, whatever that is. It's really hard. So obviously kind of separate from this question, I wanted to throw that in there to really make sure that you understand or prepared. And obviously it all depends on when the spouse is separating or their commitment is up or they're retiring, separating, et cetera. And if that is planned in this whole process with the timeline. But prereqs and knowing prereqs, obviously there's the generic kind of rule of thumb prereqs that we talk about all the time in terms of 1 year of chemistry, 1 year of biology, 1 year of physics, some English usually, the biochemistry kind of stuff. So those, I mean, for the most part, it's the same everywhere, those general prereqs. And then you're going to find some random pockets of, well, this one random school has anatomy and physiology as a prereq, and this other school has statistics as a prereq. And those you can usually just, if you're stuck, you just throw it in there before you matriculate, and you're usually okay.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, if you're applying, sort of thinking of applying broadly nationally because you don't know where you're going to be, then I think you if you do the sort of basic prereqs, you'll be fine. I think that that's the wisest thing to do, and then, like you said, throwing in an additional one for a given school could be pretty easily done later if you had to.
Yeah. Yes. All right. What else we got?
I think there was one question that I really liked that I would like for us to address.
Yeah, go find it.
If you can verbalize a little bit of it, I might have missed it. I can try to pull it back up.
It was about asking for a letter of recommendation from a dean, and if that was carried more weight. Oh yeah, there it is.
I have had a time trying to get a letter of recommendation since I've been online. Now I've graduated. The dean offered since I had to work with him on my overloaded schedule. How would a letter of recommendation from a dean be looked at?
So this is a really good, interesting question to me, because I do think that the person that's writing the recommendation letter, particularly within an academic context, can affect how the letter is viewed.
Mm.
So, for example, a faculty letter coming from, let's say, a full professor
Mm.
who has 30 years of experience teaching chemistry or whatever, and says to an admissions committee, "This is one of the best students I've ever encountered over my 30-year career." That means a lot. Whereas if it's coming from an assistant professor or an instructor or a graduate student who has only been working for a couple of years, and for them to say, "Oh, this is the best thing I've ever seen," it just doesn't have the same impact. Now, in this case, a dean, I would say, could be looked at higher, because now in this case, it doesn't appear that the student had the dean in class.
Mm.
The dean offered, since I worked with him on my overloaded schedule. So if the dean included that information in the letter, it might be seen as, well, what. So your contact with this student was somewhat limited.
Yeah.
So what's the basis upon which you're writing this letter?
Yeah.
So I think it depends a little bit, but I would say if you've had trouble getting letters and this guy's already offered, then I would say go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's always that, very similar to your like what question. It's not necessarily fancy person, big name. It's the, okay, so what? Like, how do they know you? How impactful was that relationship? What are they going to be able to say about you? And
when I would write letters, I would always say, when it was a personal letter, I would always include some stuff about me in the letter to say, I've worked in higher ed for 30 years. I've been in medical education for 25 years. And based on that history, here's what I have to say about this student. So it gives the admissions committee a little context for understanding where is this recommendation coming from? Is it coming out of this wealth of experience, or is it coming out of So it gives the committee a little bit to go on, I think.
Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
We're coming to the end here. I think we've got time for one more. This is a kind of interesting one here. We got some geographical challenges.
Nice. I live in a state, not nice that there's challenges, but nice. It's an interesting question. I live in a state that has only one medical school. I'm planning on applying in 2021. Should I move to a different state with more med schools to have a better chance? I love this question. I get this one a lot, right? It's very similar to, we obviously here in the U.S., we have this kind of superiority complex of, U.S. is number one. And I'm just like, you just got lucky that you were born here, right? And like, other people are lesser than them. Like, it's just kind of luck of the draw that your DNA happened to come out of your mom and dad having sex at the right time and just happened to be in the United States where you were born. There's a lot of superiority around, well, I'm a resident of this state, therefore I'm better than, and a lot of inferiority with students of like, my state doesn't have a medical school. I only have one medical school. And it's such a luck of the draw. Like, I don't like to talk about luck much in this process, but where you're a resident has some impact on where you can apply to schools and your potential chances based on those state schools. And obviously your debt coming out of medical school, if you're a Texas resident, you are a solid applicant and you come out of medical school in Texas with much, like a whole 4 years is like 1 year at some of these other private schools. So it improves your chances depending on where you're at. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you just have to calculate into that timeline, if that's what you're going to do, that moving to a different state in order to establish residency in that state may take a year. Yeah. So you may have a gap year in order to actually do that.
Yep.
I know in my experience, there is a difference between being considered a resident for admissions purposes as opposed to for tuition purposes after you matriculate. At the schools that I am familiar with in Texas, we're going to consider you as a resident of wherever you're coming from, regardless of whether you're going to establish residence in that coming year, doesn't impact what we're going to consider you right now. In other words, we would not project into the future some residency change because something may happen and you not get it.
Yeah.
So, so just be aware, I think, in that case that you have to think about the timeline and what the requirements are for the state that you're interested in going to, et cetera.
Yep. Well, awesome. Another Ask the Dean in the books. Thank you all for being here live, being part of the Mapped members only community, being a part of Mapped. I hope you are using it to the best of your ability. We are so excited to continue to bring you new updates on a regular basis. This new kind of what we call a sprint that we're headed into is going to be a little bit longer. We're looking at adding more developers to our team so that we can still work on other amazing features. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next week.